Okay, next up is Mill on the Floss by George Eliot, who is also known as Mary Ann Evans. She wrote the book under a male name because, of course, men are better than women. Just kidding. And she had to write under a male name in order to be more respected in society and to be taken seriously. I'm using Spark Notes for this because it's going to make things easier, but it does sort of feel like cheating. So it's the mill and the floss. The floss is a river by which these people live, and they have a mill, quite obvious. It's a Victorian novel and tragedy. It was published in 1860. There's an unnamed narrator which knows everything that happened in Maggie's life, and as the novel goes on, he sort of teases us because he already knows what happened, seeing as the novel is set in the past tense. And the narrator speaks in first person at selective points, but at other times he narrates through third person. It's set in St. Ogg's in the English Midlands, and the main protagonist is Maggie Tulliver. So before we go into Maggie, let's look at the characters. So there's Maggie Tulliver, Tom Tulliver, her brother, their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Tulliver, the mum's side of the family, the Dodsons. There's a lawyer called Wakeham, the lawyer's son, a guy called Stephen, and Lucy Dean, who is a cousin of Tom and Maggie. So, the plot. So we have Maggie, and she's very similar to her dad's side. This is the split in the clans. Here we go. The Tullivers are less socially respectable and have a depth of emotion and affection. So they're sort of more based on feelings. They're the less rich. Maggie is shown to be darker. She's the sort of character with the darker skin, the darker hair, whereas her cousin Lucy is really pale and has blonde hair. And it's shown as a rift between them, where one is more respectable even due to her looks, while the other one is sort of a castaway. But okay, back to the two clans. We have the Tullivers from the father's side and the Dodsons from the mother's side. So we know Maggie is more like the Tullivers, which is why her mother hates her at the beginning of the novel and all the way through the novel. And we have the Dodsons, so they are socially respectable, they're concerned with codes of behaviour, with manners, and they're materialistic. And this is Maggie's brother, Tom. So throughout the whole novel, we see Maggie sort of begging for Tom's attention because she doesn't care about her parents that much, she just wants her brother to love her, and he constantly pushes her away and doesn't give her this satisfaction which she needs from him and which she feels as if she needs in order to be a person. So on with the plot. Despite Maggie being smarter, Tom is the one who gets sent to school and Maggie is sort of left on her own to do her own stuff. And in the meantime, while Tom is at school, the lawyer Wakeham, which I mentioned, gets into an argument and a lawsuit against their dad about who should own the mill. And of course the lawyer wins, and Maggie's dad is so sad that he dies out of fury and frustration, which is so dramatic. And Tom comes back, and now Tom is the owner of a mill, because apparently they sort of managed to work it out in some way. But Maggie gets really close to lawyer Wakeham's son, Philip, who is crippled, and Tom is like, no, how dare you, like the guy whose father killed our dad. The next point, the climax, we have Maggie, who visits her cousin Lucy, who I already mentioned. She's like the blonde, petite girl who is so pretty and so amazing. She's so much better at life because of this. And she sort of falls in love with her cousin's suitor. The guy is called Stephen Guest, and Stephen is in love with her too. And at one point they're left alone while riding a boat, and he's like, I'm gonna kidnap you, and he rows much farther than he was supposed to, and he begs Maggie to marry him. And Maggie's like, Stephen, I would love to, but you're gonna marry my cousin, and I feel as if I need to marry Philip because I've known him so long and we've been so good to each other, and that's what everyone else wants. So Maggie returns to St. Ogg's where they live, and basically, I don't know how, but the whole town sort of thinks she's a terrible person for what she did with Stephen. She's sort of blamed by everyone. Even Tom thinks she's like really bad. It's sort of a comment on femininity in society, how she was seen as the one who took the blame for everything that happened, despite being the one who actually said no to Stephen. And Philip and Lucy contact Maggie and forgive her over time, but it's like at the very end of the book. And now the finale. So the whole book was like about Maggie's life, I guess. And in the last scenes, the Floss, the river they live by, starts flooding. And Maggie takes a boat and she's rowing to save her brother. But she does get her brother, but at the same time, the boat capsizes and they both die drowning in each other's arms. And now for the themes within the book. So the first one, the claim of the past upon present identity. So we see how, because of Maggie's upbringing, she spends her whole life sort of less confident in herself. She often has to seek others for approval, even by the fact that she's so dependent on her brother's love, which he doesn't provide to her from the very beginning. I guess it is quite bitter and poetic that they do end up drowning in each other's arms, and she would have lived if she hadn't gone to save him. But it's how your past influences who you become in modern times. The next theme is the effect of society upon the individual. So how Maggie loved Stephen but made a decision to go back to Philip just because she knew how her small little village would react. And despite doing this, the village still reacted in such a way and still put pressure on her and made her feel like an outcast and like a horrible person for simply having feelings. So she's constantly sort of attacked by this mob mentality of people living in a little town. The importance of sympathy, and I think those are the most important ones. I don't know where practical knowledge versus bookish knowledge comes in, so I won't mention it, although I just did. Motifs, so as I mentioned earlier, the disparity between the Dodsons and the Tullivers, how they are very different from each other, yet they sort of intertwine. At some point, I think we mentioned that they do a switch, Tom and Maggie, that one becomes more similar to the other, but I'm not sure if that's noticeable. Maybe Tom does develop some emotions, and Maggie does have this phase of being very materialistic and trying to be like society wants her to, but I think it's very visible that Tom is a Dodson and Maggie's a Tulliver, and this is this rift between them which makes it hard for them to be good siblings and for them to love each other, which is sort of the main theme of the whole book. This novel can be seen as a Bildungsroman, just like Jane Eyre, but the main term which we have to remember while thinking of George Eliot is historical fiction, so a literary genre in which the plot takes place in a setting related to past events, but it is fictional. So she sort of writes about a past which she imagines. During the lesson we also mentioned how the ending was critiqued. Many people said it was not satisfying, and from what I believe we said, we did agree that it's not very satisfying and it's a weird way to end such a long novel. We go through the whole thing trying to see Tom and Maggie make a good relationship, and there are sort of ups and downs, and we know they always love each other, they just can't sort of get through to each other, and the whole thing ends with them just dying and us learning about it after it's already happened. But I did mention the fact that it's also a very human ending, because to be honest, you can try hard for your entire life and there's no guarantee that you'll succeed and that you won't just die randomly one day. It can happen to anyone. That got dark very quickly. But yeah. And what does the Mill on the Floss show are the benefits of hardship? So through hardship, Tom succeeded in running the mill where his father did not. And Maggie also had a very hard life, and at the end, I think she was satisfied. I mean, she got forgiveness from the people she loved. She had close relationships. She reunited with Tom at the very end. So I think it shows that it's good to lead a hard life, but it's not always satisfactory because, as I said, you never know how it's going to end. So yeah, important things to remember. Dodsons, Tullivers, they both die at the end. Maggie loses her innocence throughout the novel. They keep fighting over who owns the mill. And the importance of community versus the individual. So how large groups of people can influence the decisions and life of a single entity who differs from them. And I think that's all. Thank you and goodbye.